Hello and welcome to Reawakening the Sacred Self, finding the way back to our ancestral soul, where we have gathered together Indigenous elders, wisdom keepers, spiritual teachers, healers, visionaries, and inspirational speakers to share their wisdom and insights as to how we can live a spiritual life that also enhances and strengthens our relationship with Mother Earth, who is the guardian of our ancestral soul. My name is Frances Billinghurst. I'm your host for and the creatrix of this event, and I'm coming to you from Kaurna country, where the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains were and still are the traditional custodian. So, Manina Padni. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am delighted to welcome Ness Bosch here today. So welcome, Ness. Thank you very much for being part of this event.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. It's a delight to have you here. And for anyone who's not familiar with Ness's work, she is the head of the goddess temple Alba and the temple of Astarte, and is a recognized member of the International Hispanic Pagan Community. Before moving to Scotland, Ness was also the regional coordinator of the Pagan Federation International in Spain. She was the first Spaniard torchbearer of the Convent of Hecate, and since 2012, Ness has also been the head of the Temple of the Waters in the Convent of the Waters. She is the founding member of the Council of the Near Eastern Pagan Religions, as well as being a member of the Pagan Heathens Symposium. In 2020, Ness coordinated the online conference for the Scottish Pagan Federation and had previously organised the International Symposium of the Fellowship of Isis, of which she is a Hierophant Priestess, a Dame Commander, and an Archdruidess. And today, Ness still continues to organise events both online and face-to-face, as well as retreats. Ness has walked a shamanic path for many years. She's travelled to different countries, sharing her knowledge and experiences on the path of bones. And her book, Sacred Bones, Magic Bones, is soon to be published by Moon Books, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. She currently lives in Scotland with her 3 children, where she is a legal pagan celebrant and holds rites of passage and ceremonies for the pagan community. She trains students in the priesthood of Alba and the mysteries of the gods of Scotland. And later this year, she will also be sharing a priesthood of Astarte and her mysteries in Iberian and also the Mediterranean. So all the links of Ness's various organisations and what she's been involved in are all listed below this interview. So please feel free to check those out. So the title of Ness's presentation today is the Iberian Druidry, Celtic Legends and History. So Ness, I am very delighted to be speaking with you, but before we start our discussion, from your introduction, you are one extremely busy woman, being involved in so many groups and so many organisations. I have to ask, how did this all start?
Well, I always been a pagan, but I became I came out of the pagan wardrobe in my early 20s, let's say. Being a pagan in Spain was not very easy, but these old MSN pages that used to be forums. I remember I just opened a forum about pagans for pagans in Spain, and that's the first time I actually made kind of public that I was a pagan, and I was in my early 20s, or around that, and since that, things start moving, and life and the gods, kind of pushing you to do things for them, you know. Once you become a priestess of the gods, you know, you work for them basically. A lot of people think being a priestess is about having a fancy title, wearing a crown, and taking photographs. So, you know, when actually being a priestess of a deity involves a lot of work, because they want you to work for them, and as a priestess, you want to serve your deity with your work and the community, obviously, because once, you know, that's our work as a priestesses. We're there to serve the community. So I think it was life and gods and goddesses just pushing me to go to places, and here I am many years later, I'm still working hard and serving the community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think when you sort of find spiritual calling as deep as path that you're walking, you can't separate the mundane from the spiritual, because it's all one.
It's all one. And when you actually when we go to study the archaeology of religion and ritual, and you know, actually you find that out. You know, it's very hard for archaeologists to say what is religious, what is mundane, because in the past it was all one. You know, we have created that separation. We have created this duality of my spirituality is apart from a day life, is when actually at the beginning it was all one, because the first, or ancestors, you know, everything was sacred for them, everything. So yeah, it's no separation. If you're a spiritual person, you cannot take your you know, your spiritual self and put it in the wardrobe.
Exactly. I certainly agree with you. So why don't we circle back to your actual presentation, the Iberian Druidry, the Celtic legends and histories, and let us begin by asking the question, or having you answer, who were these Celts of Iberia, and where is Iberia located today?
Actually, that's a very, you know, it's a very big question. And because people, scholars, are still searching for that answer. We're not sure yet who were these Celts in Iberia. A lot of scholars now are kind of starting to believe that these Celts of Iberia were actually a mix of the locals and also all these other peoples that arrived to Iberia by the sea, and they brought their knowledge, and also locals learn from them, and they kind of mingle. And so people is starting to believe that these civilizations like Tartessos, such an important civilization, you know, we find mentions of Tarsus even in the Bible, okay, actually arise as this fusion of the knowledge that comes from the Mediterranean, you know, these the Phoenicians, you know, and the locals, you know, this is kind of something that arise from this fusion. And the story of Iberia is very much about fusion, because obviously being in the very limit of the Mediterranean, and then, you know, you have the Atlantic, and then you know, you have the north. And so the whole history of Iberia is very much about fusion. And people coming from different places and bringing knowledge and you know, things evolving. Iberia is one of the biggest cultures of history and civilization we find, you know, in the west of the, you know, of the frontier of the Mediterranean. So yeah, you know, Celts of Iberia will be very much a mix of the local traditions together with the Phoenician and some Greek, but definitely the Phoenician is a very the Phoenician culture has a very, very strong impact all along the Mediterranean, and obviously Iberia being like this crossroads, you know, in between Mediterranean, Atlantic, and everything. It's very important.
No, I think we had a little bit of a delay when you were actually talking about where exactly Iberia is. So are we talking about, say, Spain, Portugal, or are we talking about south of Spain towards
No, Iberia is the whole Iberian Peninsula. So Iberia is not Spain. Iberia is Spain and Portugal. And you know, we have in Iberia, we have, you know, we build the frontiers. In, you know, in the past there were no frontiers, you just had tribes. So we have the Iberian tribes, and we have the Lusitani, we have the Galesi, we have, you know, the different tribes in the different places. But Iberia is Portugal and Spain, modern Portugal or Spain, but you know, we are all Iberians.
No.
And we all have this wonderful rich DNA, you know, full of the different bloods from the different peoples that arrived. I do have some Phoenician in me as well. Egyptian, Phoenician, you know, many bloods.
I find it interesting because when we talk about the Celts, most people sort of automatically think about Scotland or Ireland, but
that's a big mistake. That's a big mistake, because what some scholars are kind of you know, actually definitions they believe definitions have a lot to do with the Celtic culture, to the point that some of them actually believe is because of the Egyptian influence in Europe that the Celtic culture kind of arise. But it's funny because for people that don't know this about Iberia, you know, you think Celt and people just go, oh yeah, the British Islands or Latene in Switzerland, but actually they found to this date, if I remember well, the oldest Celtic writings ever found, okay, that were found at the South Iberia, the oldest one. So that's telling us something, okay? If the oldest Celtic inscriptions are found in the south of Iberia, they're telling us something very important that is being overlooked. And Iberia always has been overlooked by scholars. I don't know if because of language barrier, I don't know, because a lot, obviously, universities in Spain and Portugal have amazing scholars that have, you know, they've been publishing amazing works, obviously in Portuguese and Spanish. So I don't know if it's a language barrier or what, but a lot of people is actually missing a very special key to the Celtic question, which is in Iberia. And And that's one of the reasons I created, an organization. It's called Coarsi, to bring together Iberian peoples to put information together, also in English. So, and organize. We are planning to organize a conference in Iberia about, ancient religions and traditions in Iberia in English as well. So actually, we can help people that is searching for information in English to find that information. So that's one of the reasons we actually put together Coarsi, to be able to put Iberia in the Celtic map, one of the reasons, and also all the importance of Iberia in antiquity. And so we can help researchers, we can help anyone that is looking for information to find it in English.
That sounds fascinating. And considering this, as you said, this Phoenician aspect, and if it's coming in from the ancient Egyptians, well, we don't know how old the ancient Egyptian peoples are, because their timeline keeps getting pushed back further and further, which could almost have a flow-on effect to the Druids in Iberia.
Yeah, and it's funny because some people don't realize that with the Phoenician, travelers, people don't realize how far the deities travel in antiquity. But they travel with the people, they travel with the merchants, they travel, with the travelers in the hearts and the spirits. So is we find that with these merchants, with the Phoenicians and also the Greeks, and they brought a lot of deities to Iberia, very important one as well. And they found remains of Hathor in Iberia as well. But obviously, if we talk about important deities in Iberia, I think the most important deity in Iberia that was imported was Astarte. We find in Iberia a lot of deities that came from the far, from the Near East and Egypt, Assyria, yeah.
To Astarte, definitely, well, just from off the top of my head, she has Phoenician connections, doesn't she? Astarte. Canaanite.
Where Astarte, we're talking, she's Inanna for the Sumerian. She's Ishtar, Astarte, but she's so important. Okay, for example, she traveled to Egypt, and her emanations became very important Egyptian deities. She could be, we're talking about a deity that could be very much the origin of Isis herself, of Hathor, of the Greek Aphrodite, okay? Diana, even Athena could be an emanation of Astarte, because she was such a complex goddess. All her aspects kind of, when she traveled, she kind of gave birth of new goddesses everywhere. And when she reaches Iberia, I mean, she undertakes a huge transformation, and new deities arise, from her in Iberia. And have you heard of Brigantia, of the goddess of the Brigantes? So Brigantia could very much be an emanation of Astarte, and that then travel as Brigantia with the Brigantes to the British Islands, because we talk about Gaels and Celts, and actually in the ancient tales, that are recorded in medieval treaties, We find, for example, I mean, it's all about, in the legends, it's all about the heroes and you know, the magical ladies and the ancient goddesses and that. So we find the children of Mil in these ancient legends, and the children of Mil were no other than people that came with the Phoenicians to Iberia. Okay, they crossed the whole Mediterranean. You know, they were in Egypt. You know, it was long travels, and they're related to the, I believe, to the children of Noah and Adam. Okay, so we're talking, you know, Near East, and they travel of, you know, during all these years. Meal, yeah. So if I remember, he was kind of someone from the royalties, you know, and he ended up married to an Egyptian princess that we know as Ascota. Okay, but actually, I was reading some academic papers about that she could very much be one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They remember well, and one of them was, you know how they change names in antiquity. The princesses, you know, she was obviously once Akhenaten was removed from the throne, had, you know, their children had to change their names as well. So she became, you know, as kind of as Koda later on. But we know from the legends she was an Egyptian princess that married Mil, and the children of Mil and Ascota continued traveling, you know, and in Iberia, they kind of settled in Iberia for a time, and then their descendants, the children of Mil, we have the hero Breogan. He built this huge tower in the old Coruña, the Tower of Brigantia, the city of Brigantia. And from there, he saw Ireland. And then he said, oh, we got to travel there. And that's how, you know, the children of Mil, these Gaels, ancient Celts, traveled to Ireland, and then they traveled to Scotland, bringing their deities with them, you know, and that's how actually, that's how a very important Celtic goddess traveled to the islands, where, you know, goddess Cailleach, the Cailleach. So that's how from Iberia, because she actually originates in Iberia. She was the goddess of the tribe of the Galesi. So she traveled to Ireland and then to Scotland with these people, and that's how, you know, also some of the other deities from Iberia travel to the other Celtic lands. So we actually, from Iberia, we actually exported deities and different emanations and all of that. Even a very important figure in the for the British people, the Queen Boudica, which is like a symbol of, you know, female power and everything. What a lot of people don't realize, she was actually from Iberia. Herself and her husband were actually from a region in Iberia, Beira Baixa. What is Beira Baixa now? And she, from Iberia, they move, they travel to the British Islands, and she brought with her goddess Andraste, which is actually Astarte. And you know, she brought her children, you know, So actually, a lot of the deities that are worshipped as British are actually Iberian, which is funny. But it's just about people not knowing. That's why it's important to be able to share the knowledge in English, so people learns more about the Iberian origin of all these legends and deities and people and all that.
Yes, I know certainly from my own Celtic studies, I've heard of like the 5 invasions or the invasion myths that made up the establishment of Ireland. They certainly do talk about the sons of Neil, and then Scotia goes on to give a name to Scotland.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, and even in the stories of Boudica, it talks about her not being a local. She was married into the local tribe there, but of the Iceni, but they never actually, well, at least from the stories that I've read, never actually mentioned where she originated from. So thank you for putting that extra puzzle piece into that puzzle. Now we know where she was originated from, and also where her goddess came from, because her goddess definitely wasn't a local Iceni goddess either in that part of England. And now we know why, because it came from Iberia. So thank you very much for that.
People don't, it's people don't realize, and actually all these invasions of the Celts have to do a lot with the Phoenicians trading, needing things, they needed from the British Islands. We find Phoenician remains in Cornwall and different places, and they travel up north because they needed tin, because they were the masters in metallurgy. Okay, they were the masters in metal, and the Celts are masters in metallurgy because of the Phoenicians, and basically all this expansion of the Celts have a lot to do with the trading routes of the Phoenicians, and it's everything connected to the Phoenicians, to be honest. And I'm going to tell you something very funny, because I already mentioned Astarte, how she changes in Iberia, okay? And it's very funny because people don't realize Phoenicians travel up to the right north, because Kailer travel up to the north as well. You find references to this ogre, huge giant goddess in Norway as well, and but languages, okay, and you put the runes side by side, you can see the origin of the runes in the Iberian languages. I mean, you just have to put them together and you can see the runes, because the runes, the Iberian languages, are actually part Phoenician, part is the Phoenician, how it evolves in Iberia, the written the language, and some Greek, but mostly Phoenician. Okay, and evolves in Iberia with the so it's very funny because some scholars are actually starting to say, okay, so if and that's one of the things I believe, that, for example, how the Norse myths talk about Freya being a foreigner, okay? And she brings the runes. What she brings is actually the Iberian alphabet. And you have different alphabets in Iberia, the one from the southeast, the one from the south, but she actually has the knowledge of the runes because she knows the Iberian some of the Iberian alphabets. And she's a foreigner that comes from somewhere else, okay, and she teaches Odin the runes. What she is doing she's teaching Odin the language that, you know, she brings from Iberia. And Freya could be very much an aspect of Astarte as well. And also we can find that even the cats that, you know, are related to Freya could be Iberian links, because we have links in Iberia as well. So I do believe deeply that Freya is actually an evolution, you know, an emanation of Astarte, and she travels north with the merchants, with the Phoenicians, you know, and she becomes Freya in the North pantheon.
Oh, it's very interesting that this sort of overlap, this influence that from Iberia has had on not only the say the Irish or the Scottish Celts, but onto the Norse traditions and the peoples there as well. And it's also been very underplayed, as you've been pointing out, through other historians and research up to now. So if you could sort of bring this a little bit forward into, say, a modern context with your interest and your knowledge of Druidry, and especially the influence of the Phoenician aspect that's coming through.
Yeah, and that's why for me I'm working to put this priesthood of Astarte and the temple of Astarte, so people can actually learn how important she was, you know, how many goddesses emanated from her, how to work with her, you know, and that's one of the things she's pushing me to do. Like, yeah, it's about time. I kind of sit in my throne fully, because we are talking like she could be one of the most important goddess of antiquity until now, because under different names she has been worshipped under many different forms for thousands of years. It's not like her cult died. It's a big mistake to think that Christianity kind of killed the goddess or killed the goddesses. No, they continue on under different forms, aspects. And for example, Astarte continued to be worshipped even in the church. Like in South Spain, she was, the Romans call her Noctiluca, the goddess of the seas. That's why we have the Isis of the seas is actually Astarte as well. And she is still worshipped in the church, like the Virgen del Carmen, which is like a holy mother of the seas. Okay, so people still worship her under a different name and form, but it's still her. She's still getting the energy from. So she is very much alive, and you know, and we also, for example, another very important deity that emanated from Astarte, I believe also in Iberia, is Epona. And obviously we have Epona, and then from Epona we have Rhiannon. So in a way, and you know, we have Aphrodite, a lot of pagans that actually worship, still worship Aphrodite. So deities never die. They just, you know, they're just worshipped under different names and forms, and they're still relevant.
And Epona, there's not a lot known about her, because she is, for the audience members who aren't familiar with her, from my recollection, she wasn't Roman, so she was a Gaulish horse. There's something connected with her with horses, is that correct?
Yeah.
So whereabouts in, say, so we're looking at somewhere between Spain and also France. It would,
we're talking about that. We're talking about in between the Spain and the Pyrenees, you know, the Gaulish people, and we actually find Astarte riding horses, the lady of the chariots, you know. So again, we find her in the origin, and then, you know, she transformed. We find Epona, and then from the continent she traveled to the islands, and you know, she becomes Rhiannon,
who's really
later on.
Yeah, in the Welsh myth and the Mabinogi, where there's two branches that are telling her own story, and of course she is very heavily connected with horses. So this is all
Yes.
fascinating. How is it?
Yeah.
Well, from Iberia, is it? We don't know a lot about it, yet its
No.
influence is wide and broad, and really said fills in all the gaps through all the other stories and legends that we hear as well. So when we're coming back to the actual Druids themselves, do you know much of their practice, what they would have practiced, or when you were in Spain, what were you actually practicing, and how that sort of corresponds to now you're living in Scotland?
Yeah, even the Druids, we find references to the of the conquest of talking about the Iberian Druids and their sacrifices. And we find Greek references. We also find Roman references later on. Obviously, because the Romans had to fight a lot with the Iberian Celts, like for hundreds of years, and so we find a lot of references about these barbaric, Iberian tribes and their druids, and their sacrifices. But yeah, people don't realize that the druidry in Iberia, was immensely important, and we exported also druids, because, for example, you find in the tales of the Milesians that you might recall that they talk about the Milesians. They won Ireland because they're powerful druid. So we find traces in the old tales, the medieval tales, and obviously we need to take with a pinch of salt what we find in the medieval treaties, because obviously, everything was filtered by the writer, but still, that's how we have a lot of these deities. We find them still alive in those tales, even if they're not called deities anymore, like the Welsh goddesses. They're goddesses. They become magical, powerful women later on, but they are the reminiscent of these ancient deities.
And so how would you suggest to people who want to sort of tap into these ancient, powerful deities of the Iberian Druids in their modern concept? Are there certain practices, or what would you suggest to a beginner who wanting to sort of connect into this?
Well, as I said, it's not too much in English. That's why I founded this organization, Coarsi. I can give you the names so you can share them. But we find some of if you do a little bit of research, as I say, it's not much in English, but there's some books I could recommend. So let me check on my note, because I do have. There was this book. It's very interesting. The Phoenician Origins of Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons. Okay, by L.A. Waddell. Just spell it Waddell. So the Phoenician Origin of Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons is a very interesting book. It was published in the 20s, I believe, in the 1920s. And it gives you really good clues. I mean, obviously now it's all information, and all, things change over the time. But that's quite an interesting reading, because it gives you clues about remains that have been found in the British Islands in Phoenician, and ancient Phoenician deities of things, relationships we found here. For example, one of the most we think is one of the most important deities in Iberia, male deities in Iberia, is Lugh, because you actually find most of the biggest number of shrines to Lugh in the continent is in Iberia. So that's telling us either it originates in Iberia because of the amount of shrines, or that he becomes, he's more important than in the Gao, for example. I mean, if you have like a biggest number of shrines, is definitely a huge clue to the importance of that deity.
Does he have the same connection as he does? It's the same or a very similar deity from memory, who in Irish myth is connected with the sun. Is that correct? Does he have the same association with that in Iberia?
Yeah, Luke is a sun god. And in a way, he's also connected to Belenus. But you find shrines to Luke all over the place in Iberia. And I mean, like, he was massive. And then obviously we have Luna's sun, we have the Sabbath that relates to him. And we find Luke up to, in the British Islands, in the Gallia, he's one of these deities that was very, very important. But I believe he's related to Belenus, to Bel. And we know where Bel comes from. Bel is Baal. That also comes from Syria. So as I said, everything Celt is very connected to ancient Phoenicia and to the Phoenicians as these people that travel all over the place, trying to source things for their, businesses all over the place. So
that's really, really fascinating. So do you see there is a role in Druidry today, as opposed from the historical aspect and getting all that sort of like recognized, Druidry itself and all its various practices?
My opinion about Druidry today, I think, because I'm a shamanist, but I am also a druidess. So I think a druid is basically a Celtic shaman, to be honest, if we could say that in modern terms, because now we know shaman is like this huge umbrella, and we put a lot of things under that umbrella. It's an umbrella term. But Druidry is very much about people of these ancient Celtic lands connecting to the land and the landscape and what they have around. So basically, what we understand about modern Druidry actually is something very new, to be honest. We know it's very new because it's born very much of these scholars trying to explain ancient monuments, they go to Roman sources. For example, ancient Romans thought that, for example, Stonehenge was Druid. The Druids built it, when we know they didn't, because dreams, appear much later in history. We know they're Neolithic, they're prehistoric, and but Romans thought they were Druid, and some of these first scholars and archaeologists that were trying to talk about Druids, obviously they went to the Roman sources because that's the only thing they had, and obviously then kind of got things wrong. But modern Druidry, for what I know of what I think, I might be mistaken, is very much born of this romantic movement trying to reconnect with the ancient past, and obviously the Druids were mentioned by Romans and other sources, so them trying to connect with this kind of European identity and about local practices, and this romantic movement, you know, and kind of is born, you know, people getting together, trying to dress like druids, visiting ancient monuments, you know. And it's funny because there's still people now connect, for example, Stonehenge to the druids. No, no. But it's funny, it has become a point of meeting for all modern druids, when actually it wasn't a druid building to start with. But talking about Iberia again, a lot of people, for example, travel the world to go to Stonehenge, when in Iberia we have megaliths, okay, and you know, constructions from prehistory way older than Stonehenge, like way older. Some scholars actually believe that the henge culture kind of originates in Iberia, and actually, as I said, we can find in Granada, okay, the biggest in the south of Spain, the biggest concentration of dolmens in the whole of Europe, the biggest, like, and the oldest as well. So that's telling us something. But obviously, Iberia is just, you know, you have Africa, the north of Africa, you have Iberia, and Iberia was the bridge to Europe. So it will make sense that the megalithic culture originates there, with the people crossing from Africa, you know, to Iberia. And also you need to think that Iberia is very important in prehistory, because it was now frozen, like the north of Europe. We're talking like the north of the it's all, is the ice age, is all frozen, you know, the different ages, you know, and Iberia is not frozen. So people settled in Iberia, and they settled and they lived in Iberia, they evolved, and then they travel. When the ice started melting, then you could travel north. So it would make sense that the megalithic culture originated there, and then these people travel and they brought their own, you know, their thing about stones and stone building and all of that. But it's funny how people ignore that, and that we have amazing megalithic complexes in Iberia. Amazing.
Absolutely fascinating. And unfortunately, we're coming towards our end, but there seems to be a nice little segue talking about the dolmens and the megalithic stones, because of your new book that is actually entitled Sacred Bones and Magic Bones. And you did mention that, and if I'm correct in what I'm hearing from you, your form of Druidry is very shamanic, because you are an arch shamanist yourself. So you have this really sort of more indigenous, can I say, aspect to your practices. Now, do you talk about any of that in this new book? And if not, what is this book about Sacred Bones all about? Sounds really fascinating.
Well, Sacred Bones, Magic Bones is I do mention the importance of Iberia in antiquity. I do mention you know, some of because I do talk about anthropology and history, the folklore of bones, and obviously I talk about remains and archaeology. So obviously I do mention Iberia being this important cauldron of, you know, cultures and everything. But it's basically a book for everyone who wants to understand kind of the beginning of spirituality, you know, because I believe that bones are the very bone of, you know, spirituality, you know, is very important in is still important nowadays, and it relates obviously as well to the bones and the other world. And but it's like a big it's like a compendium of different traditions and everything that relates to bones. Not everything, but I tried to put as much as I could to share about this path of the bones. Yeah.
But I think when you think about it, I mean, even our own selves, the bones, our skeleton is like the core foundation of us,
Yeah.
of this physical being that is us. So
Yeah.
talking about it from a spiritual sense, why wouldn't bones, if you were using it like literally or figuratively, be the foundation element to other spiritual practices as well?
Yeah. And there are many, they were the foundation, and there are many spiritual practices, everything around funerary rites and everything. And obviously, still nowadays, bones are very important for many spiritual people and practices, you know. So I try to kind of make a compendium, a very resumed compendium of bone spirituality in my book. And so the first part of my book is about history and everything, and the second part of my book is more practical. So it's very animistic, very shamanic. It's magical. I share rituals to work with bones, and yeah, I think it's an interesting read.
And when would this book be available?
Hopefully, you publish, you're a published author yourself, you know, everything takes time. So I believe it will be, I think we're more looking at beginning of 2024. We're talking beginning of next year, but pre-sales will start this year at some point. And you are also participating in another of my projects, another book. We're putting together a group of very, very interesting and powerful women. We're putting this incredible book about healing, working with goddesses and wounded goddesses, you know. And so that's another project that is, so we are working on it. And I'm also writing about sacred shamanic tattoo and ritual tattoo, and that's another of my books that is going to be published in the near future. So yeah, I'm a busy priestess, very busy mom with 3 children. I literally just write when I put my 2-year-old to bed when I can.
Yes, and for all your other projects that you have on offer, Ness, we've got your website listed below, and this sounds really, really fascinating. And then thank you once again for all the wisdom and inspiration that you have shared with us. It's been absolutely a delight talking to you today.
Thank you. I hope people will find it interesting, and they will try to dig a bit more about the importance of Iberia and, you know, Iberian druids and everything that we can track.
Yeah, especially as what you've mentioned, it fills in a lot of gaps for anybody who has been interested or studying even normal Druidry as in the British influence. Now we're hearing like the underlying stories of where these myths and legends have actually originated from. So thank you once again for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's all right. And to everybody who is watching, again, please look below to check out all the links for Ness and her books and her courses that she's offering. And Natalia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that everybody who's been watching this has been enjoying it as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you again. Blessings.